I inherited my grandfather's house. The basement wasn't empty.
Let me start with this. I didn't want the house. When my grandfather passed, the reading of the will felt like a formality. My older brother Mark expected to inherit everything. He was the golden child, the successful one, the one who actually kept in touch. I was the black sheep, the struggling artist who moved out of state and never looked back. I figured I'd get a book or maybe one of Grandpa's old fishing poles. But when the lawyer looked up at me and said, "The house on Sycamore Street is yours," I thought it was a mistake. Everyone stared. My brother looked like someone just pissed in his coffee. To be fair, the house was more of a relic than an asset, a Victorian-era thing with sagging gutters, ivy strangling the porch, and windows like dusty eyes. But it had history, family history, too much of it. The first thing you should know is that Grandpa didn't let anyone in the basement, ever. As kids, we weren't allowed past the second step. "Dangerous down there," he'd bark. We thought he kept old tools or chemicals, maybe a hoard of newspapers like those people on TV. But there were always stories. Uncle Jim used to joke that Grandpa kept his sins buried deep. Once, when I was 9, I heard thumping from beneath the living room floor in the middle of the night while sleeping over. Grandpa blamed the pipes, but it wasn't cold enough for that kind of noise. And when I mentioned it to my mom later, she went pale and said, "Don't ask questions you don't want answers to." Now, I own the place. I moved in the week after the funeral, not because I wanted to, but because I couldn't afford my rent in Portland anymore, and the idea of free housing, even a haunted one, sounded better than homelessness. The house smelled like old wood and mildew. Dust motes danced in every ray of light. Photos lined the walls, black and white ones of stoic relatives I barely recognized. A younger grandpa in military uniform. A woman I never met, wearing a pearl necklace and an expression like she'd seen too much.
The basement door had 5 dead bolts. Dead bolts. On the inside, that was the first real sign something was wrong. The nights in the house were loud. Floors creaked in empty rooms. Doors slowly pushed open even when I knew I'd shut them. Once, around 2 a.m., I heard a soft humming coming from the heat vent. It wasn't the pipes. It was melodic. On the third night, I finally worked up the nerve to open the basement door. The keys were labeled with faded masking tape. I undid the locks one by one. The air that came out when I cracked the door was dense, stale, and bitter, like breathing through old wool. The stairs were steep and narrow. I had to duck. My phone flashlight barely reached the bottom. The walls were stone, cold, seeped into my skin. There were no tools, no chemicals, just a large steel door at the far end, and a chair. A single wooden chair, facing it. Like someone had been sitting there, waiting. The steel door was sealed with a padlock and several chains, not new ones either. These were thick, old, rusted, the kind used to anchor boats or restrain something. I didn't touch them. Instead, I started searching the house for clues, anything that might explain why Grandpa treated the basement like a prison. That's when I found the trunk in the attic. It was beneath a tarp, hidden behind broken furniture and boxes of holiday decorations. Inside were dozens of journals, all belonging to my grandfather. Some were newer, with neat penmanship. Others were fragile, their ink faded and smudged. The earliest dated back to 1954. July 12th, 1954. I heard the whispering again last night. Same words, same voice. "It's her. I know it's her. I've been good. I've locked the door, but she still comes." December 5th, 1957. Mark came down the stairs, only 3 years old. Shouldn't be able to undo 4 locks. She let him in. I found him standing at the steel door talking to it, asking for his auntie. He doesn't have one. March 2nd, 1963. I buried the key behind the old ash tree, burned the spare, God forgive me. I read through hundreds of pages. They were unhinged, terrifying, and consistent. Always the basement, always her. Grandpa never once gave her a name. But the scariest part? The entries didn't stop until last year. I called Mark. Not because I wanted to, but because I needed answers, and he was the only one in the family who might actually know something. He picked up on the third ring.
"You moved in?" he asked flatly. "Yeah." A pause. Then, "Have you been downstairs?" I hesitated. "Yeah. The steel door is still there, with the chains." Long silence. "She's still there?" he asked. "She?" He sighed. "You shouldn't have gone down there, Ben." I waited for more, but he hung up. The next night I couldn't sleep. The humming returned, softer this time, almost sweet. I followed it barefoot down the creaking hallway. It came from the vent near the basement. When I crouched to listen, it stopped. But I swear to you, I heard my name, whispered like a lullaby. "Ben, come down." In the morning, I decided to dig behind the ash tree. It was mentioned in the journals, the place where Grandpa said he buried the key. I didn't know if it would even be there after all these decades, but I had to check. I brought a shovel and started digging near the tree line at the back of the yard. It took almost an hour, but eventually the blade struck something solid. A small metal box, rusted and sealed with a corroded latch. Inside was a key and a note. "If you open that door, make peace with God first." I should have thrown the key away, tossed it in the river, burned the note. Instead, I pocketed it. That night, I dreamed of the woman in the photograph, Grandpa's mystery woman with the pearl necklace. She was sitting in the chair downstairs, smiling and humming. I haven't opened the steel door yet, but I've been sitting in the chair, staring at it, night after night, listening. I think she knows I'm here.
I didn't tell anyone I found the key. I kept it on a string around my neck, tucked under my shirt like some kind of twisted talisman. Maybe it was superstition. Maybe it was fear. But ever since I pulled that rusted box from the ground behind the ash tree, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been chosen or cursed. The house had changed. It felt different. The air was heavier, more electric. The lights flickered more frequently, but only in the hallway leading to the basement. The old grandfather clock in the living room started ticking again. No one had wound it. It ticked only between 2 and 3 a.m. And then there was the woman. I started seeing her. The first time I was brushing my teeth, half asleep, foamy mint dripping from my chin. The mirror in the bathroom was foggy from the shower, but there was a shape behind me, tall, pale, wearing something old-fashioned, something from a black and white movie. When I turned, there was no one there. I wiped the mirror and stared into my own bloodshot eyes for a full minute, trying to convince myself it was a trick of steam and shadow, but then I noticed it. On the mirror. A word. Just one. Soon. I started sleeping with the lights on. I kept a journal by my bed, rereading passages until my eyes burned. Grandpa's descent into madness, or was it clarity, felt more like a mirror every day. One passage stuck with me. June 10th, 1971. It's not a ghost. She isn't dead. Not completely. I don't know what they did to her down there, but it's not natural. She calls to me, not with voice, with thought. I dream her dreams. I wake with bruises I don't remember. I hear her crying through the walls. She says I'm next. I wanted to believe he was delusional. I needed to. But the bruises on my own forearms told a different story. And the crying, I heard it too. It began on the 5th night. I was reading in the study when it came through the vents. Soft, mournful. A woman's sobs echoing through the pipes like some grotesque lullaby. They grew louder the longer I listened. And then, she started speaking. Not in English, not at first. It sounded like Latin or maybe something older, a guttural, whispery language that scraped against my skull like nails.
I bolted downstairs and shut the vent with a hammer and nails.
The sound stopped instantly. But when I returned to my room, the chair from the basement was there, just sitting in the corner, facing the bed. I ran. I packed a bag and drove all the way to Mark's place in the city. He opened the door wearing that same expression of quiet dread I remembered from childhood, the one he wore the day Grandpa found us playing on the basement stairs. "You stayed in that house?" he asked. "You knew what was in it," I shot back. He didn't deny it. Instead, he poured 2 whiskeys and told me the story our family had buried. "She was our great aunt," he said. "Eleanor, Grandpa's sister." I blinked. I've never heard of her. Exactly. Eleanor was brilliant, gifted. She'd earned a full scholarship to university back in the 40s, unheard of for a woman in our family. But while she was away, something happened. She returned. Different. Cold. Obsessive. She'd talk to people who weren't there. Spend hours in the dark, whispering to herself. Then came the murders. 4 men, all from town, all found dismembered in the woods, missing their tongues. And every time, Eleanor was the last person seen with them. There wasn't enough evidence to convict her, and Grandpa refused to believe she was capable of such evil. So, he hid her, in the basement. "You're telling me he locked his sister in that room?" Mark nodded. "She stopped being his sister a long time before that. Whatever she brought back from school, or whatever found her, wasn't human." I felt sick. "Why didn't you tell me?" Mark looked at me, eyes hard. "Because I thought the house would stay locked, that you'd sell it and leave. Not dig up the key." I pulled the chain out from under my shirt and dropped the key on the table. He didn't touch it. "Whatever you do," he said, "don't open that door." I stayed at his place for 2 nights, long enough to stop dreaming in Latin, long enough to believe I was safe. But the 3rd night at 3:03 a.m., the old grandfather clock in Mark's hallway began to tick, and I heard humming. Familiar. Sweet. Coming from the vent. I left before sunrise. Back at Sycamore Street, the house greeted me like a grieving lover. Silent. Still. But the moment I stepped inside, the lights flickered, the clock chimed, and something had changed. The steel door in the basement was ajar. Not wide, just enough to show that the chains were slack. The padlock lay on the ground, snapped in 2 like a toy. I don't know how to explain what it's like to see yourself in a photograph that predates your birth by decades. Not a relative, not a look-alike. Me. Same scar under my chin from a fall in 2nd grade. Same slouch in the shoulders. Same expression, half curious, half concerned. I studied it for hours, sitting in that chair with the door behind me, still closed, but breathing. I could hear it, like lungs expanding in quiet anticipation. That photo wasn't printed from a phone. It had the burnished hue of old film, the ragged corners of something carried too long in a wallet or a pocket. Eleanor stood beside me, or beside him, with her arm around my shoulders. She couldn't have been older than 35. I tried to convince myself it was a trick, a fabrication, but there was no Photoshop when this was taken, and Eleanor, as far as I knew, had never owned a camera. My phone had no signal, but the battery was somehow still full. I snapped a picture of the photograph and tried to compare the 2 versions of me side by side. No difference. I was in that video, but how? By the 3rd day in the house, reality began to slip sideways. I heard footsteps behind me in rooms I'd just left. Mirrors no longer reflected what I expected. Once I passed the hallway mirror and saw myself, but my reflection was smiling, though my own face was dead still. The doors creaked open without wind. Lights flickered even though the bulbs were new. I chalked it all up to an old house, bad wiring, stress. But it was more than that.
The whispers had returned, only now they came in the voice of my father. He died when I was 12, a boating accident. I barely remembered his face, but I remembered his voice, low and warm, always laced with laughter, even when he was furious. Now that voice whispered to me through the keyhole, "Benji, you remember the lake, don't you?" That was the first thing it said. At 3:33 a.m. I was sitting on the floor outside the steel door, my back against the wall, knees to my chest. No one ever really leaves this family, not even the dead. I clutched Eleanor's journal. I'd started reading it again, not front to back, but in loops. The entries had begun to change. Where before they ended with frantic handwriting and shaky penmanship, now they ended with new words, words that hadn't been there 2 nights ago.
He's outside the door now, listening. She's wearing his father's voice. She'll try anything. She's learning. Was she writing these new entries? Or was I? On the 4th day, I ventured into the attic. It had been padlocked shut when I arrived, but that morning the lock hung open, dangling like a baited hook. Dust swam through the shafts of light. The floorboards groaned under my weight. Dozens of boxes, black plastic bins, even a wooden chest, all nuts. And in the corner, another door. Not steel, wood this time, painted red. It'd have a latch, but no knob, no hinges. A single handprint, bloody, marked the center. I turned away. Some part of me knew that door was meant for later, or maybe never. Instead, I opened the nearest bin. Inside were cassette tapes, hundreds of them, all unlabeled, except for one. Family Therapy, 1987. I dug around and found an old tape recorder, batteries still inside. Against my better judgment, I pressed play. Static, then a voice. "You're safe here, Eleanor. Just start from the beginning." Her voice, young and shaking. "I think something's wrong with my son." That hit me like a hammer. I paused the tape, rewound, and listened again. Eleanor had no children. She never married. That's what I'd been told. But there it was, her voice, trembling, near tears. "He's not like other boys. Sometimes I find him standing outside the basement door, whispering to it. Once I caught him feeding it." The therapist cut in. "Feeding it what, Eleanor?" A long pause. Static. "His own fingers." The tape hissed. I dropped the recorder and ran from the attic. Something had shifted. The whole house felt tilted, like gravity itself had warped. I barely made it down the stairs when I heard movement behind the steel door, heavy, slow breathing, something wet dragging against stone. And then, scratching. Not at the door. Above it. Like something had started climbing. I pressed my forehead against the wall, desperate to calm my racing heart. That's when I saw it. A new message, freshly carved into the wallpaper above the doorframe. 3 words. "You let me." I left the house that night, drove to the nearest motel nearly 50 miles away, paid in cash, refused a room with mirrors, slept with the lights on. But I didn't sleep long. At exactly midnight, I woke to a knock at the door. Not the room door, the bathroom door. It creaked open. The mirror was fogged. I hadn't showered, and scrawled in the condensation were the same 3 words. "You let me." I returned the next morning. I didn't want to, but something in me knew it wasn't over. Couldn't be. This wasn't a haunting. It wasn't about ghosts. It was about lineage, bloodlines, inheritance.
I called my mother, asked her point blank, "Did Eleanor ever have a child?" Long pause. "No," she said. "Why would you ask that?" "Are you sure?" "Ben," she snapped, "why are you digging into this?" Then her tone softened. "Some things run in the family, but you don't have to carry them. You understand?" I didn't, but I think she did. Back at the house, I found a birth certificate tucked inside Eleanor's Bible. Name redacted. Father, unknown. Date, September 13th, 1987, my birthday. But not my birth certificate. This one had burn marks around the edges. Smelled like sulfur. Attached was a note. Not born, called. That night, I sat in front of the steel door again. I didn't bring the key. I didn't bring the journal. I just sat, waiting. And at midnight, the door didn't open. It exploded. Not literally, but it felt like that. The air sucked out of the hallway, lights blew, a wind howled from nowhere, and it, stepped out. Not Eleanor, not my father, not me, but something wearing all our faces, shifting, changing, smiling. "Home," she said. I couldn't move, couldn't scream. She stepped toward me and whispered, "Tell them I'm real." Then she disappeared. I woke up outside. It was morning. The house behind me was silent. The steel door was gone. So was the hallway. So was everything. Just rubble. Ash, as if it had never stood at all. But in my pocket was the photograph. Eleanor. And me. And behind us, the steel door. Waiting. I always believed our family's worst secrets were buried beneath floorboards or behind basement walls. Turns out, they were much closer. Hidden behind the door I'd never dared open. After my grandmother's funeral, I returned to the family home alone. My mother refused to step foot in it. She claimed she was done with ghosts. My aunt moved to another country years ago and cut off contact. That left me. The quiet, obedient grandson who always said yes, always kept secrets. But not anymore. The house felt different now. Hollow. Like it had exhaled after years of holding its breath. I wandered through each room, still thick with that antique perfume my grandmother loved. I sorted through her things slowly, half hoping for answers, half fearing I'd find them. And then I found the key. It wasn't labeled or hidden in a clever place, just sitting at the bottom of a dusty jewelry box. Old brass with a crooked tooth. I knew what it opened. The attic. The one room in the house my grandmother always told me never to enter. "It's full of rats and bad wiring," she used to say, her voice sharp. "Don't be nosy, Daniel." But I was nosy now. Very. The attic door groaned open like it was resisting. The air up there was stale, dense with years of decay. Dust motes hung like snowflakes in a shaft of moonlight that cut through the small circular window. It was mostly junk. Covered furniture, old trunks, boxes sealed with tape that had long since dried and curled. I moved slowly, flashlight in one hand, the other trailing along cobwebbed walls. Then I saw the photographs. An entire wall of them, nailed directly into the wooden beams, dozens, maybe hundreds, all black and white, some cracked with age. Faces, children, mostly girls, some crying, some smiling, some blank. They weren't family, none of them. One photo had a date scrawled across the bottom in pencil, March 1967. Another, November 1973. They continued like that, one or two every year for decades. The most recent one,
April 2006. My stomach dropped. That was the year my cousin Emily disappeared. She was 7. They said she wandered off at a park during a picnic. There was a massive search, but they never found a trace. My family barely spoke of her again. Her name became a ghost. But there she was. In the photo, Emily stood next to my grandmother. She won't holding her hand. Her eyes were red like she'd been crying. My grandmother was smiling. Beneath that photo, a note was pinned to the wall. Emily, Day 1.
I stumbled back from the wall, knocking over a trunk. It burst open, revealing old dresses, children's clothes, some torn, one stained dark brown. I was going to be sick. I backed out of the attic, locked the door behind me, and sat on the hallway floor, shaking. My grandmother, my sweet, cardigan-wearing, hymn-singing grandmother, had done something, repeatedly, systematically, for years. But how? And where were the bodies? I called my mother. She didn't answer. So I tried again, and again. On the 4th try, she finally picked up, her voice groggy. "Daniel? I found the attic." Silence. "I know about the photos." She inhaled sharply, then flatly. "Burn them." "What?" "Everything. Burn it all. Do not give that to the police." I sat in stunned silence. "You knew." A long pause. Then, "I knew something. We all did. But no one could prove anything. And we were scared." I felt like a child again. Powerless, small. "She took Emily." "I think so," my mother said, voice cracking. "She always had her favorites, quiet ones, girls with big eyes. She'd watch them for the summer while the parents traveled, or got divorced, or tried to get their lives together. Why didn't anyone do anything? We were afraid of her, Daniel. Your grandmother, she had a way of making people disappear. Not just children, adults too. Threats. I don't know how, but people that crossed her ended up gone, or ruined." "Did she kill them?" Another silence. "I don't know," she said, "but I think the attic was her temple." I didn't sleep that night, just sat in the living room, photos spread out across the floor like puzzle pieces. So many lives, so many secrets. At dawn, I went back up. I had to know more. I pulled down every box, every trunk. Some held journals, coded, scribbled messes I could barely read, but one stood out. A red notebook with gold trim, no title. Inside, it was meticulous. A record. Each entry had a name, an age, a location, and notes, sometimes just one word. Compliant, resistant, gone. Emily's entry was longer. Quiet, withdrawn. History of night terrors. Mother unstable. Perfect candidate. Showed signs of adaptation by day 3. Spoke of a woman in the wall on day 5. Possible hallucinations. Below that, progress unknown. Intervention required. No further notes. What the hell did that mean? I turned the page. There were more names, some familiar, others not. One caught my eye. Daniel, age 6. Me. Too volatile. Screams in sleep, talks to mirrors, no retention. My blood went cold. She had planned something for me too. Maybe even started, but I had no memory of it. Or maybe I'd repressed it. I took the red notebook, some photos, and the journal and went to the police. They didn't believe me at first, until they ran facial recognition on the photos. Several matched missing person cases from decades ago.
the story exploded. The media called it the Attic of Silence. The FBI took over. Excavations began behind the house. They found remains. Not all, but enough. One skull was confirmed to be Emily's. My family was shattered all over again. My grandmother had been quietly trafficking and murdering children for over 40 years, hiding behind her reputation, church donations, and soft-spoken lies. No one ever suspected the woman who made cookies and sang hymns. It's been a year since the attic was discovered. I moved across the country, changed jobs, changed everything. But I still see the photos in my sleep. Still wonder how many lives she touched. Still wonder what she did to me that made her stop. One night, I asked my mother. She didn't answer at first. Then she said, "You used to scream about a girl with no eyes. Said she lived in the attic and watched you through the vent. What happened to her?" "I don't know, Daniel. But one night, after you woke the whole house, your grandmother moved you out of the guest room and into the basement. Said you were too loud for her work. After that, she never touched you again." Sometimes I wonder if that girl saved me. Other times, I wonder if she's still up there, trapped in that house, in the walls or the wood or the air, watching. And I pray no one ever finds that key again.